Once again, I was up and moving about and drinking coffee before even most of the crew was up. Today was going to be a very bittersweet day because on the plus side, we were back at Moyo Island and I was really looking forward to both of the dives we had scheduled. But this was also the last day we would be diving. The Mermaid liveaboard likes to use Moyo as their first and last dive because it's basically located as close to Bali as you can, so it helps break up the long traverse between Bali and Komodo. And Angel's Reef is just this really beautiful reef out off the side of the island.
Last time we did this wall here.
What do you need?
I've got it now.
We still had a bit of current going on, but in general, the water was warm and beautifully clear. Our dive plan was basically to drop in the shallows, go off the edge, and then drift along the wall until we ran low on air, at which point we come back up into the shallows. We only went down to about 87 feet, but you can get well over 100. Jen even decided to take over the GoPro again for a little while. And this is why you never film divers from above. Jen's first love is, of course, little bitty clownfish, but she found a love for black-saddled TOBYs on this dive. I'm pretty sure it's the face. But we also managed to find a good amount of clownfish for her, including this really little guy. And of course, the advantage of being with a guide who has dove the site many times is they can find things like this shark sleeping spot. These eels stick up out of the sand, but it's basically impossible to get close because they all withdraw down. We were really trying to stretch out our dives as much as possible, so we spent the last bit in the shallows, fighting the current as gently as we could, just trying to stay down. Amusingly enough, we had all been trained that 30 minutes before a dive, you show up for a briefing, only to show up this time and there was no briefing because basically it was the same dive. Go down, blow the bubbles, see the little fish. At this point, our guide Katut had caught on to the fact that we just really liked looking at the mass of fish, so he didn't spend quite as much time pointing out the itty-bitty tiny things hidden in the rocks. These banded sea snakes are both very striking with their black and white coloration and highly poisonous, but they generally leave people alone. The first time we were out here, we were warned that they swim up to the surface and will sometimes come near divers just to kind of try and hide in their shadow, but not to worry. On the way out to the dive site, Jen had been joking with me to try and conserve as much air as possible so we could get as long of a dive as possible for our last one. Ironically, she ended up being the one that ran out of air first, probably from giggling at clownfish too much. We did try and stretch the dive as much as we could, but sadly, an 80-liter tank only holds so much air, and eventually we had to surface. And sadly, that was the last dive. From here on out, we cleaned up our gear, and then we would have most of the day and the following morning before we would be back in port. There were a few things to take care of, like the bill for the onboard services, which, since it was in rupiah, came to millions. And then we sat around, ate, did the drinking that most of us had been avoiding while we were actively diving, and just enjoyed the sunset. By the time we woke up the next morning, the ship was already back in the Bali port.
And the biggest challenge for coming off of the boat and getting home is, of course, how we get Carl, the Komodo dragon scuba statue, safely home.
And after a week of getting plied with all sorts of yummy food, we had our last breakfast. Considering we were basically leaving here directly for the Continental Divide back in the States, we had a lot more excitement ahead of us this summer. However, it was bittersweet as we said goodbye to the boat once again. When we did the Mermaid trip in 2019, it was the single most expensive vacation we had ever done, and we fully expected it to be a once-in-a-lifetime sort of thing for us. The only reason we'd been able to come back again, especially with our current lifestyle, was the fact that I won that contest off their newsletter. So while we really enjoyed ourselves, and this is honestly some of the best diving we have ever done, we fully expect not to be able to do this type of trip again for years at best, if ever. So since your body's still getting rid of nitrogen, it's not safe to fly for 24 hours after you're diving. As an extra safety, we had scheduled one night staying in Ubud before we'd be getting on a plane and heading back to the United States. This time, Taters had found something on Airbnb that looked kind of promising. It also ended up to be down an unmarked alley way at the back behind a gate that didn't even have a sign. The only reason we even thought we were in the right place is one of the pictures on Airbnb kind of looked like the outside of the villas. When check-in time did finally arrive, I was pretty much blown away by what we were getting for $100. We spent a really relaxing afternoon in our private jungle-adjacent pool, at least until the rain started.
Jen's just commenting how awesome it is watching the rain. And I just commented that yes, it's nice because we're not actually like walking in it, running from lightning in it, etc., etc. We're not going to have to do that for under 2 weeks.
Since there were no restaurants located close by and it was pretty much impossible to walk anywhere from where we were, we ended up ordering takeout Indonesian food, which promptly got delayed for over an hour because there was an absolute downpour going on and the delivery person asked Jen if they could not drive in the rain. We had such a nice night that we actually briefly looked into whether it was feasible to change our flight and stay for an extra day or two, but sadly the CDT was calling.
Once or twice a day.
I only drink it in the morning.
Our flight left Bali on June 19th, and on June 28th we started our through hike of the Continental Divide Trail up in Glacier National Park.